The bowl season is upon us, but does it really matter until the SEC joins the party? We're counting down the days, not to Christmas, but to the South Carolina-Maryland Miami game, of course. Georgia, well, how good is Louisville with Grantham? We'll find that out. We'll look at the Bulldogs, of course, and the Cardinals. Will LSU cap a mediocre season by reliving 2006? We'll explain. Are the Hogs as tough as Texas, and are the Aggies still soft? We'll answer those questions as well before the boys do on the field later this week. And we answer questions and ponder whether Bama really has anything to worry about with the Buckeyes. The SEC in 60 starts right now. And despite displacing Miami for Maryland there in the Open, I'm waking up right now. This is Mark Rogers of MarkRogersTV, getting set for the SEC in 60. This is your destination for SEC football talk each and every Monday. We do this at right around noontime Eastern Time, 11 o'clock Central live if you want to catch the live broadcast here on Google Hangouts. But, of course, we upload it, and you can find us on YouTube at MarkRogersTV, also at my website, MarkRogersTV.com. Same show, same thing, all the video, all the audio. But, hey, if you're running around doing the chores, doing the exercise thing, want to catch us just on the audio, we upload that to our podcast, Mark Rogers TV. Look us up on iTunes or on Podbean. And then, of course, it's the SEC in 60. You can look that up as well. And we've got another stellar lineup of guests this week with Joe Lisi coming in just about, I don't know, as soon as I decide, maybe in the next 10 or 20 seconds, because I've got little of an axe to grind in this one. So let's start right in on the football games that start later this week. We had 5 bowl games on Saturday. I was immediately into it. I didn't care if it was Nevada and Louisiana Lafayette. I was ready for some postseason play. Some people say there's too many bowl games. If there's too many bowl games, then don't watch the games you don't want to see. But as the day progressed, we got to see how good Utah was. I would love to have seen the Utes play a little bit better opponent in bowl season, but the Utes cap off a nice little 9-4 season. They're out in the Pac-12. Of course, you've heard me comment that the Pac-12 and the SEC need to get together more often. Maybe like once next season would be good after 0 regularly scheduled games and, of course, no games in the postseason between the 2 supposed best conferences in college football. So, again, I'm Mark Rogers with the SEC in 60, and this is what we do each and every week. We talk SEC football for at least 60 minutes. Let's bring in one of our mainstays, Joe Lisi of GoForThe2.com, to talk it up. And we're going to talk some of those preliminary bowl games as we get set for the New Year's Eve showdowns with Mississippi State, Georgia Tech, Ole Miss, and TCU. We'll hammer those out next week. But I'd like to talk, Joe, about some of these games that really involve some programs in the SEC that were a bit disappointing this year. This is usually the storyline and the narrative for some of these programs that we see play on dates like December 27th, 28th, what they had expected to play in much better bowl games like a South Carolina with a preseason top 10 ranking. But let's start with South Carolina, Miami, cranking it up, a couple 6-6 teams in the Independence Bowl. So, Joe, we welcome you aboard once again this week. Hope everything's going well. Let's talk some Miami and South Carolina.
Sounds great, Mark. First, happy holidays. Thanks for having me. It goes back to the 1987 brawl in the Orange Bowl between these two teams. Very interesting matchup. You have South Carolina 6-6 overall, but they're not the same team that they were when they won 3 straight 11-win seasons under head coach Steve Spurrier. They're -4 in turnover margin overall, giving up over 200 rushing yards per game at 214 yards per game, and going to be facing a very high-octane offensive attack with running back Duke Johnson and Philip Dorsett at the wide receiver position. Let's talk about South Carolina defensively this season. They have not looked good against speed teams this year, Mark. You can look at really 4 games in particular. Auburn, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Clemson gave up a chunk of yardage to each one of those teams. They gave up over 600 total yards to Texas A&M. They gave up over 490 yards to Clemson. They gave up 395 rushing yards to Auburn and Nick Marshall and gave up 8.7 yards per carry, and then gave up 344 rushing yards to Tennessee and Joshua Dobbs. I like Miami in this matchup for the speed on the offensive side of the ball with Dorsett on the wideout position and Duke Johnson, and a very solid, heavy offensive line in Miami that's averaging 179 rushing yards per game. Brad Kaya came on in the passing game late in the season, and Miami's defense is solid. They're only giving up 184 passing yards per game, led by linebacker Denzel Perryman. I think the Hurricanes roll in this game.
Joe, it's interesting because when we finally dive into postseason play, unlike the regular season when the non-conference games hit us in the first few weeks of the season, we've got a lot to compare these teams on, especially between the SEC and the ACC. So Miami, I can't figure this team out. They finished at 6-6. Those two final losses they suffered after the very close call against Florida State, that really could have made their season. They had some balls bounced the wrong way off guys' helmets for touchdowns, that sort of thing. They were very close with a 16-0 lead, with another 16-point lead of knocking off FSU in Tallahassee. That would have made their season. But then they crumbled down the stretch against Pitt, which is somewhat understandable in the rushing defensive category because James Conner is one of the best in Pitt. If you haven't seen him play, he can really run the football. He is one of the best backs in college football. But against Virginia, pretty pathetic offense out of the Cavaliers, and Miami gave up some points against those two teams. So I understand that Brad Kaya came out against a very, very tough Louisville defense, which we'll talk about in just a second, against Georgia. So I understand the letdown on opening night against Louisville. You throw the freshmen into the fire after they had some issues involving veteran quarterbacks with injury and academic ineligible status. They throw Kaya into the fire, and he really got better and better and better. I saw him from gun to gun against Louisville. I saw him against Nebraska, and then he really started to tear it up. And this kid, I think, is going to really break out as a sophomore. If throwing 25 touchdowns this year and 11 picks was not breaking out, the future is very bright with the Canes. But this team is built up, at least in regards to looking at the recruiting rankings. I thought they were going to be better this year. I didn't expect 6 losses. I think they're the most talented team in that ACC division and should have played Florida State for the championship if you're just looking at talent. So Duke Johnson's going to be very difficult for South Carolina to handle. You mentioned the Gamecocks' poor showing on defense. It started with opening night against Kenny Hill. They really never turned in a good defensive performance. Even against Kentucky, they gave up 45 when just about everybody in the SEC was holding the Wildcats down. And they're like 92nd points allowed, 93rd in terms of total defense. So for them to handle Duke Johnson in this one, I think is going to be a rather tough task for them. The Miami the team seems to be a little bit more together than South Carolina. We had Connor Tapp on from 24/7 Sports last week to talk about some of the issues off the field with South Carolina. Nothing major, but it just doesn't seem like a team that's that focused, wanting to play in the Independence Bowl after, again, as you mentioned, 3 consecutive 11-win seasons, finishing in the top 5, playing on New Year's Day, playing the Wisconsins, playing the Nebraskas, playing some teams that were ranked in the top 10 or 15 over the previous seasons. It looks like the South Carolina team, we'll see how much mettle they have if they're going to want to finish strong, want to look good on national TV. And that's one of the things I distinguish, Joe, from these bowl games, is even if they got crazy names and you're facing a 6-6 team and you've had a down year and you just want to pack it up and go away for the off season, at the same time, when you think about it, Joe, for a lot of these teams, even big teams, this is the only time all season that they're the only game in town. If you want to watch college football, you're going to watch this game. So more eyeballs are on these games by far than almost every regular season game. So I would expect South Carolina is going to step up and play a good game against Miami. They've fallen down to about a 3 to 4 point underdog in this one. One guy to look out for, I want to mention, Joe, is Pharaoh Cooper, who really had a breakout season for South Carolina as a sophomore, caught 60 passes, returns punts as well, but he's been their main guy since Ellington moved on to the NFL, and of course Ace Sanders as well. So we got South Carolina, Miami in there, and so you like the Canes in this one, right, Joe?
Yeah, I do. I just think the physicality of the offensive line and the secondary matches up very well against Dylan Thompson, and you mentioned Cooper. I just think they put in a solid defensive effort. And you have to remember something, Mark. Miami needs this game, in my opinion, a lot more than South Carolina. A lot of pressure on Al Golden to bring back the Hurricanes to respectability. 9-4 last season. 7-6 look a lot better than 6-7 at this point.
All right, Joe. I haven't committed on that game. I'm going to do it later this week when I do my picks. I'm having trouble with this one because I automatically side with the SEC before I start to dive in, because the SEC wins 70-75% of its bowl games down through the years. You can look at the last 10 years or so. So I start there, assuming the SEC is going to win, and then I break it down from there and see if the other team has a fighting shot. But this one's a toss-up, I think, unless South Carolina really mails it in. I can't expect or don't anticipate Miami doing the same in that one, despite, again, a disappointing 6-6 finish. Okay, let's move on to the Liberty Bowl, Joel. We've got Texas A&M taking on West Virginia. I would still like to get some definitive word on Clint Trickett before I pull the trigger on this game, because he means a whole bunch to this West Virginia team. We go back in a number of conversations and talking about the Mountaineers' performance against Alabama, and I know that was ancient history, but again, I think it shows us what this West Virginia team's capable of when you consider on a neutral field they played Alabama really well, would have thrown for like 450 yards if receivers wouldn't have dropped passes. And then they prove it a number of times throughout the season, specifically against Baylor, winning by 2 touchdowns. It's a very, very potent offense. And the defense isn't great, but they have a lot of speed and playmaking ability. The secondary is really good at the safety position in particular. They take on a Texas A&M team with Kyle Allen. He seems to be somewhat entrenched at quarterback, although that's going to be quite the conversation during the offseason, whether Kenny Hill's going to reclaim his starting job or Kyle Allen is the man and never going to relinquish it. So got the Aggies taking on the Mountaineers in Memphis, Joe.
From what I've read, Mark, from a West Virginia local paper, Clint Trickett's still not right after the concussion that he suffered at home against Kansas State late in the year. So a little skeptical about his availability for this game as well. If he can't go, then Skylar Howard will go. He's got 5 touchdowns on the year, no interceptions, starting the game against Iowa State at the end of the year, got that road victory. So that was important. Should he have to start this game, he's a little bit different type of quarterback than Clint Trickett. He's a little bit more mobile, not the same type of pocket passer that Clint Trickett is, a little less inconsistent in the passing game, so that'll affect the timing with Kevin White and the wide receivers in this matchup. But I go to this factor. I look at Kevin Sumlin as a head coach. I think he's a great game planner. You could go back to week 1 against South Carolina, where he had all summer to prepare after losing Johnny Manziel, Mike Evans, and Ben Molina, and he found an offensive game plan that exploited the holes in the South Carolina defense. Now the 4-week layoff, in my opinion, will benefit Texas A&M greatly in this matchup. You look at West Virginia as a whole, minus 15 in turnover margin, Mark. That's 119th out of 125 in the country. They've lived dangerously all season long. They've been very sloppy with the football. I know they played some close games, but in my opinion, Texas A&M, better athletes on the defensive line. I like the Aggies in this matchup. I think it's a very close game, but the uncertainty of Clint Trickett, who has 18 touchdowns on the year, the leader of that offense, if he cannot go, not sold on Skylar Howard, who really has not a lot of games under his belt and doesn't have the timing of the offense down with Kevin White. In my opinion, I like Texas A&M in this matchup with Kyle Allen. They're battle-tested, have some quality victories, especially on the road against South Carolina and Auburn. I like Kevin Sumlin and the crew to get the victory over West Virginia and Dana Holgorsen.
Yeah, Joe, it's unfortunate about Clint Trickett. I would like to see West Virginia go with its best. I would like to see Trickett against this Texas A&M defense that continues to underachieve. We know that it's been bad under first Johnny Manziel and now Kyle Allen and Kenny Hill this season, having to score 50 points a game to win football games. Myles Garrett is a guy that I want to see. I think this offense is tailor-made for his kind of game. because he likes to play in space. He likes to get into the opponent's backfield against a passing team, a finesse team. We last saw him on that Thanksgiving night against LSU, where they just pounded him and mauled him, and that's not the kind of game he likes to play. But Myles Garrett, an exciting freshman for Texas A&M, 11.5 sacks, 12.5 tackles for loss, all SEC second team. And he's going to be the cornerstone of this Texas A&M defense if they are to get any better and really challenge the Western Division. Texas A&M, again, 7-5. Kyle Allen, we'll see how he performs as he continues his maturation. Interesting to see him come out of the gate against, can't remember who that first game was. Wasn't Lafayette. It was one of those Louisiana Monroe. They barely won that game, didn't score many points. He didn't complete 50% of his passes in his first start. Then he turns around, he goes on the plains at Jordan-Hare in front of that crowd and puts up 41 points, and they pull out the big victory. Since then, he's been pretty mediocre. Again, if you caught him against LSU, he didn't look bad. The pass rush was in his face, and LSU pretty much held him down defensively, but much of it not his problem in that one. Josh Reynolds has been a breakout player to look out for on the Texas A&M side. If you're looking for guys that you want to see during this bowl season to spin forward, folks, into 2015, that would be a guy again. It would be Myles Garrett for me on the defensive side for the Aggies, and offensively Josh Reynolds. Not as highly recruited as some of his running mates at wide receiver like Speedy Noyle and Ricky Seals-Jones, but he really had a nice season with 12 touchdown receptions out of Josh Reynolds. And, of course, again, we want to see how much they use Allen, how much they use Hill, if they want to mix both of them in there. It's not a matter of experience. They both have decent experience at this point, but who will get the nod as we go into spring drills for Texas A&M? So it's Texas A&M, West Virginia, Liberty Bowl game. And so, Joe, you like the Aggies, right?
Yes, I do. I just think the uncertainty of Trickett and better defensive line, in my opinion, in Texas A&M, I think they get the victory in the bowl game.
We'll never know, but I'm guessing if Trickett was 100%, you would lean that way.
It would have a definite factor in the game, but his uncertainty, I've studied all the local papers, and they say he's probably not a go. Whether that is true or not is to be seen, but in my opinion, it's enough to make me leery of West Virginia in this game, and for that factor, just think that Texas A&M is the more solid team with the quarterback position in place, and I like the Aggies in this matchup.
Because based on our conversations a number of times, I take it you're a Clint Trickett fan. You've talked up Trickett in the past.
Well, he's a former Florida State quarterback. I think he really benefited in Dana Holgerson's system this year. Last year, a little inconsistent from coming over, but I really think he's a big-time player and can make the transition to the next level if given the opportunity. More of a mid-round pick, in my opinion, but I think he has the tools and the arm strength to make it at the next level.
Joined by Joe Lisi of GoForThe2.com. We remind you this is the SEC in 60, and something I did fail to mention off the top of the show is that you can catch us on the SEC Fans Radio Network. So that's SECRadioNetwork.com every weekday. So we tape this on a Monday. You can catch us the rest of the week, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central on the SECRadioNetwork.com, Dr. SEC's platform there for the SEC. Talking SEC football every Monday, and we play that on the SEC Radio Network throughout the week. We've got Stephen M. Smith coming up very soon to talk about Alabama, Ohio State. And then to close it out, we've got Brittany Taylor Newman of Football.com and Last Word on Sports to talk about the Will Muschamp hire at the University of Auburn. All right, Joe, Arkansas, Texas. I don't know what the average age or demographic of our listening or viewing audience is out there. If they have any recollection of Arkansas, Texas back in the day, but this is the first thing that comes to mind when I see Hogs and Longhorns, or those wishbone attacks in the good old days of the 70s and 80s, leaking into the early 90s, Arkansas, Texas in the Southwest Conference. And so it just does me good to see these two programs get back together in the Texas Bowl. Of course, their sponsors, the people running that bowl, were thinking the same thing when they got together, a couple 6-6 teams. But they're 6-6, but this is one I really want to see because these are two programs that Arkansas almost definitely on the rise. Texas, I'm not so sold on, but of course it's a marquee program in college football, and the Big 12 needs Texas to be back on top. So Arkansas and Texas, size it up for us.
Well, this goes back to the days, like you mentioned, of Quinn Grovey and Barry Foster and Butch Hadnot and Peter Gardere. But let's talk about this matchup. I like Texas in this game for their defense. They're led by head coach Charlie Strong, a defensive-minded head coach who always has his teams ready for battle. And Texas, very solid on the defensive line. They have 39 sacks on the year. They're giving up 164 rushing yards per game, but very solid in the secondary, 186 passing yards per game. But they have speed off the edge. Look for Charlie Strong to have a game plan in place where they put 8 in the box. They force Brandon Allen to beat the Texas secondary with his arm, and I think that's the recipe for success. You look at the defensive front by Texas, they're speedy, can create double teams. I know they're giving up 164 rushing yards per game, but that was a majority in the Big 12 at a spread offensive attacks with mobile quarterbacks. It's a little bit different with a pro-style offense in Arkansas with 2 solid running backs in Collins and Williams. So a little bit different. I think Texas will have the game plan in place to really stuff the box and force Brandon Allen to beat that secondary with his arm, and I think that's where Texas holds an advantage in the game. You look at the offense for Texas, I like the way Swoops has come along down the stretch, taking over for David Ash. He's a dual-threat quarterback, has 2 great big play running backs in Jonathan Gray and Malcolm Brown, and I think they have speed offensively to challenge that Arkansas secondary, Mark. I think it really comes down to game planning and the ability for Charlie Strong to have a defensive game plan in place. And that's why I like Texas a lot in this game. I really think Texas dominates Arkansas in this matchup.
Wow, Joe, I just don't see it with Texas. They're going to have to prove something to me against a solid opponent, a quality opponent in this one. What I see with Texas, and I didn't see the Longhorns a whole lot this year. I saw the UCLA game. Saw the Oklahoma game in particular, but of course they did improve down the stretch. I think their schedule was pretty front-loaded and had to face those tougher games early in the season. So when they started to make hay and come back after they reeled early against BYU in particular, they were a mess in that game, 41-7, that they did improve down the stretch, but improved against the softer portion of the schedule. So I want to see them against an SEC caliber front seven on defense, try to run the football. And again, I think both teams are very much going to test the quarterback precision and ability to dissect the defense, go to the right guy, and make the right read in the secondary and force the running game away from being predominant in this one. But Arkansas, what surprised me out of the Hogs this year is that I knew that they had the offensive front and the 2 backs in Williams and Collins to do some damage. Where they really improved is Brandon Allen became a proficient quarterback, not a great quarterback, but he was pretty miserable against good competition 2013. He really improved. They moved A.J. Derby to back up and become a 2 tight end set along with Hunter Henry, who's probably the best tight end in the SEC, and they bring in A.J. Derby. He catches 22 passes as well, so they have more of a passing attack than they did at this point last year. They really improved in that sense with Jared Cornelius on the outside as well. A couple guys defensively that I just think are tremendous. Trey Flowers, ever since he stepped on campus at defensive end, he misses his running mate in Chris Smith, who we actually saw. I was watching whatever game in the NFL yesterday, and I saw Chris Smith making some plays, or that might have been on Thursday night with Jacksonville. But Trey Flowers, one of the best defensive players in the SEC. He's coming off a big year, 13.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. Marshall Spate is one of the best in the SEC for that Arkansas defense. And Darius Philon, a kid that we talked about much this past offseason, coming off a big freshman campaign in 2013. He had 10.5 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. I just think a team that's capable of shutting out LSU and Ole Miss in back-to-back weeks, and I don't think the Rebels were quite right in that effort, but still back-to-back shutouts. Nobody's really scored on them. Alabama has not. I think Arkansas is a little bit too difficult for Texas. The Hogs have proven against really good competition that they can put up a fight, where Texas, aside from the UCLA game a long time ago, I don't know that they've really played great competition. Yeah, Oklahoma, they played them within 5 points, but against the better teams that they really have enough to put some points on the board. Of course, they had their shot against TCU on Thanksgiving night, and they got steamrolled, and I know that's TCU, and they may be the best team in the country, but Texas needs to prove something to me. So if I get caught on this one, then I'll admit Texas is better than I expected, but I'm pretty solid on Arkansas in this one. All right, Joe, let's see. Next up, we got, again, another intriguing matchup when it comes to name brand in the Music City Bowl, LSU and Notre Dame. The last time we saw these two tussle was when they were both a little bit better in 2006. Brady Quinn against DeMarcus Russell at the Superdome. It was a close game for a half, and then LSU put on the speed and athleticism in the second half to win that one, going away 41-14. This one, stakes are not quite what they were in 2006. LSU still trying to find the guy at quarterback. Anthony Jennings has gotten all the starts aside from the Brandon Harris debacle at Auburn. Brandon Harris has the better upside. Anthony Jennings entrenched as the starter. LSU and Notre Dame, you start this one off for us, Joe.
Well, I go back to the 97 Independence Bowl, Mark, with Kevin Falk, Rondell Mealy, and Cecil Collins. That's how old I am in Notre Dame, with Bob Davie at the helm. But it really comes down to the time off. I think you look at Notre Dame overall, dropped 5 of 6 down the stretch. Really think that the time off from the end of the season, that season-ending debacle on at the Coliseum against USC will really benefit Notre Dame to really take some time off and really get focused for this matchup. Let's look at Notre Dame offensively, still putting up points. They're averaging 33 points per game. Brian Kelly said that look for a dual quarterback play in this bowl game with Everett Golson and Malik Zaire, their sophomore quarterback. I'm not so sure about that. I think that Brian Kelly got that out to maybe put some pressure on Everett Golson in this game. But you look at Everett Golson in the offense, averaging 293 passing yards per game. They're rushing for 150 yards per game and really have a solid offensive line. And you look at LSU right now. LSU has a solid defense. They're giving up 143 rushing yards per game, Mark, and solid in the secondary. But you look at Notre Dame's big play wide receivers and William Fuller and Corey Robinson, the son of David Robinson. Between them, Mark, 111 receptions, 19 touchdowns. You look at 2 games that LSU struggled this year with mobile quarterbacks. Dak Prescott against Mississippi State and Auburn and Nick Marshall. Everett Golson's a mobile quarterback, so that gives LSU problems defensively. You look at LSU offensively, they've had trouble stretching defenses. You mentioned Anthony Jennings. He's only completing 48% of his passes. Brandon Harris, not much better at 50%. They relied heavily on the offensive line and Collins and those staple of backs led by freshman phenom Leonard Fournette, Kenny Hilliard, and Terrence McGee to wear down defenses, but really can't stretch teams vertically with their big play wide receivers of Doral and Dupree. And I expect Notre Dame to be in this game. In the end, I think LSU gets a hard-fought victory, but I think it's very close, maybe 3 points at the tops. I think LSU is pushed to the limit by Notre Dame. In the end, they get a close victory, though, because of Les Miles and John Chavis.
All right, I start with defense on this one, and I think there's no comparison between Notre Dame's defense and LSU's defense. If you look at their performances against the quality competition, I don't know what I get with Notre Dame. Early in the season, I got a team that took Florida State to the wire. If the kid could have been a better actor at the goal line on the pick play, then they beat Florida State in Tallahassee. So they were as good, if not better, than Florida State on that night. The Louisville game, they lost by 3. Didn't see that game, but Louisville is a quality team. They lose that by a field goal. Again, they start 6-0 against a marginal schedule at that point, and then they really crumble down the stretch. And defensively, they got hit with injuries. They've been inexperienced all year. We know that it's been a young team, particularly on defense, and they had a lot of suspensions early in the season that have come back to bite them against with some of their better players in the secondary in particular. For LSU, early in the season, they had the horrible showing at Auburn. The Mississippi State game, despite losing by 5, they really got dominated in that game in Death Valley. But since then, they've been a pretty consistent football team. Against the better teams, Alabama, they played extremely well. Ole Miss, they played extremely well. Texas A&M, they dominated that game. And I'm going to use the Texas A&M game as kind of a blueprint because I think that's the kind of domination we're going to see for LSU. They only beat Texas A&M by 6. They allowed them to stay in the game because of some of the shortcomings you talked about. Passing the football, inconsistency on the 3rd and 4s and 3rd and 6s, and trying to complete passes that should be routine at a place like LSU where they continue to struggle. So I think on the scoreboard, it's going to stay relatively close, but LSU's defense is going to control this game. I just don't see them giving up many points. Again, look at the track record of this defense over the second half of the season against Ole Miss and Alabama and Texas A&M, teams that are extremely talented, have some flaws, but are much better than Notre Dame. I just think LSU is going to walk away. I think the point spread is going to be difficult for me to choose. It's about 7 or 7.5, but in terms of having confidence in a team winning a game, I think LSU's got this game. Leonard Fournette continues to just impress everyone. And you mentioned the wide receiver capabilities at LSU haven't dropped off that much. They just don't get the football because of the inconsistent quarterback play. But between Malachi Dupree and Trayvon Durrell, I think LSU can make some plays in the passing game. The LSU formula, Joe, as you well know, for victory is play action off the power run game. And Anthony Jennings could hit 8 of 20, and that could be effective because he hit some downfield throws and chunk yardage, and that's typically what they do or have done in this offense, and that's the big plays that they made against Ole Miss, despite only completing a few passes, and Alabama, and specifically against Wisconsin, were downfield, and I think that's where they're going to hit Notre Dame and win this by roughly 7 to 10 points, but again, dominating 7 to 10 points in that one. All right, Joe, let's close this thing out with Georgia-Louisville. This one intrigues me. I think this is going to be a really, really good game at the Belk Bowl. Georgia and Louisville both come in at 9-3. There's the storyline of Todd Grantham playing against Georgia after he goes to Louisville. His tenure with Georgia is kind of peppered with positive and negative, depending on your perspective of what he accomplished there. They went to 2 SEC championship games. They had one of the better defenses in the SEC and in the nation in 2012 when they wanted to play, but the performance was kind of spotty. Interesting in this one for me is that Louisville, we think of them throwing the football all over the field and putting up tons of points because that's been Teddy Bridgewater, that's been Bobby Petrino, especially in his first run there. But it's really the defense at Louisville that's so good. Number 2, rushing allowed per game, 3rd in the nation in rush defense, not allowing opponents to rush for more than 200 yards, 28 straight games. And they face some teams when you talk about Duke Johnson at Miami, Florida State with Daquan Cook and also Carlos Williams. They face some decent running teams, Clemson as well, and they still were rock solid in the front 7 for the Cardinals. So I think that's an aspect of this game that most people probably underestimate Louisville against an SEC team that's one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the league. So size this up for the Belk Bowl.
Well, I really like Georgia in this matchup to dominate this game. It's not just because I covered Georgia for most of the season. When you break down the numbers, let's start with this right now. We know Todd Grantham was the defensive coordinator at Georgia last year, did not play very well defensively, didn't create turnovers under Todd Grantham last year. This year under Jeremy Pruitt, a considerable change on the defensive side of the ball. Georgia's plus 15 in turnover margin, and more importantly, Mark has done it on the road with a plus 11 in turnover margin ratio. So that's a positive sign heading up into this matchup. A lot of defensive players like Malcolm Floyd and Jenkins, their linebacker, have already stated that they're coming back for their senior seasons. That's a positive sign for the Bulldogs heading up into this matchup, along with a guy named Malcolm Mitchell, who's a big play wide receiver on the offensive side of the ball. That shows me that Georgia's focused heading up into this matchup, that they feel there's unfinished business in Athens. That's a positive sign. You look at this Georgia defense led by Jeremy Pruitt, only giving up 158 passing yards per game, and really going to challenge that Louisville offensive line. This is a Louisville offensive line that surrendered 36 sacks on the season. Kyle Bowen got the start for Bonifant against Kentucky, put up great numbers, 21-31, 281 yards, 3 touchdowns. Whether Bonifant goes or Bowen, we have to see, but both of those quarterbacks are freshmen. I think that's the difference. You look at Louisville's defense, they're giving up 199 passing yards per game. Georgia and Hudson Mason, 20 touchdowns, completed 67% of his passes. Look for Mike Bobo. If Mike Bobo's still there, he's been mentioned for the head coaching job at Colorado State. Hasn't been named yet, so Bobo should be there for this game. He does a fantastic job of utilizing his offensive talent. Look for those wide receivers of Chris Connolly, Malcolm Mitchell. Look for Sony Michel to get involved in the slot. And I think Georgia has way too much offense. They dominate Louisville in this game.
Dominate Louisville. I think this is a really good game. I think you make a great point in regards to psychology of this one, with Georgia getting the announcement from guys like, you ran down most of this list, outside linebackers Leonard Floyd, Jordan Jenkins, and Malcolm Mitchell at wide receiver, left tackle John Theus, that they all return next season. They were all draft eligible and fairly high on some advisory boards and some draft lists, but they're all coming back. And again, I think you bring up a key point, and then that changes the team's mindset, knowing that concept and mindset, in knowing that we got some key parts coming back for next season, and we can build off that. I think Georgia's much more the talented team. Again, Louisville, I don't think they're going to let this thing get out of hand. I think I would like to know the status of Will Gardner. They've got some questions at quarterback, but one of the best wide receivers in college football. And again, the strength versus strength matchup of the Louisville front seven and what they've been able to do against top running backs, Duke Johnson in particular. They get to face Nick Chubb and that Georgia offensive line to see who's man enough to move the line of scrimmage. You mentioned Hudson Mason. He doesn't blow away people with sheer passing numbers because they haven't asked him to do that, but the touchdown to pick ratio is very impressive. He's taking care of the football, as you mentioned, 20-4 there. I would say, obviously, you're picking the Bulldogs here. You've got Miami over South Carolina. You've got Texas A&M over West Virginia. You've got Texas over Arkansas. LSU in a tight one over Notre Dame, and you got Georgia pretty big over Louisville. I'm going to hold my picks on Texas A&M West. No, I'm going to hold my pick just on South Carolina, Miami, and this Georgia-Louisville game. Otherwise, I love LSU to win. Again, control the game. I don't know that they can blow them out Notre Dame because of the offensive limitations and just the way they play football on offense. I love Arkansas. I'm pretty confident they win. And Texas A&M as well. I'm going to have to study the other two a little bit more before I pull the trigger later in the week. Joe Lisi of GoForThe2.com joins us every week, not just on the SEC and 60, but he joins us every week in picking all the big bowl matchups and throughout the season, the top 25 games. And, Joe, I'd have to go back and go through the videotape and see what the numbers were this season. But do you keep track of your prediction numbers?
Not for our show. For the predictions that I do on the website, hitting around 56% for the regular season, Mark. So not a bad year. 2-3 in the early part of the bowl season. Didn't get off to a successful start. The Camellia Bowl in South Alabama was a very disappointing loss. They had victory, but couldn't hold on as Bowling Green pulled out the victory at the end.
56, is that straight up money line or is that against the spread?
That's against the spread, so we'll have to see what it is straight up. But
All right. I think you outdid me against the spread this year. I'd have to work out the percentages. I was like 25 or 30 games over 500. 3-2 right now against the spread, Joe. So we're in decent shape starting off the bowl season with 5 games that I gotta say before we get into the Power 5, I'm just comparing scores and trying to break things down that way and see who played best against the better opponent. So Joe Lisi of GoForThe2.com, please join him on his website there. He's got tons of college football insight and analysis there. All right, Joe, if we don't talk to you before Christmas, have a Merry Christmas and appreciate the time as always.
Always, my friend. Thank you, and have a happy holiday yourself.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Good stuff from Joe Lisi again. GoForThe2.com. Follow him on Twitter as well. This is the SEC in 60. I'm Mark Rogers. Follow me on Twitter as well. We'll discuss some college football there. And one guy that we found on Twitter was Mr. Stephen M. Smith of touchdownalabama.net. He does some exceptional work there and a variety of platforms around college football, collegiate sports. He dives into the NFL and the NBA and all sorts of things. This guy is just a central point of information and analysis, but it all starts with Alabama sports, and of course, it all means Alabama football this time of year. Stephen M., how are you today?
Doing just fine, Mark, and yourself?
I'm doing great. Wow, let's see. We are just about 10 days away from the first semifinal in college football, Oregon, Florida State, Alabama, Ohio State. So we had you on a couple weeks ago. We broke down some of those tendencies from the Buckeyes and also from the Crimson Tide. Is there anything leaking out in regards to any type of information, practice schedules, what Alabama could be working on, any storylines that are breaking in regards to anything to keep us up to date on bowl preparations for the Crimson Tide?
Well, there's a lot going on in Tuscaloosa right now, Mark. One of the main things is five-star athlete Bo Scarborough, who was supposed to be on the Crimson Tide roster during the regular season. He ended up attending a junior college to help out with his academic aspect, but he will enroll on the Crimson Tide's roster in January. But as of right now, Bo Scarborough is in practice. He is in bowl preparation, and I got a chance to see this young man. And Mark, he's good as advertised. The speed, the hands, good power, outstanding leg drive, and he's going to be special if he is able to start or play in the bowl game. But it's not just him. The buzz that's been going around campus and bowl preparation happens to be true freshman receiver Cameron Sims. Cam Sims is one of few freshmen that has gotten a chance to play a lot this season because he's just too talented to keep off the field. Cam Sims, 6'4", 215 pounds. He's big body, great body control and balance, good hands. But what I love about him is his blocking ability. He's not afraid to get out there in space and spring running backs down the sideline and also spring receivers free. I got a chance to see a lot of that against Tennessee, where Cam Sims would throw a block and help spring Derrick Henry for a touchdown. And he would also throw a block and spring Amari Cooper down the sidelines for a score. So Cam Sims, a very capable receiver. But as of right now, Alabama's working on the kinks of trying to manage the players that have had some nagging injuries. Running back T.J. Yeldon has been dealing with some foot and ankle injuries this season, but he's been in bowl preparation a lot this week and, of course, last week. Cam Robinson, they finally have him back fully healthy and in bowl prep. Receiver Ardarius Stewart and tight end Brian Vogler, those two players had stretched knee ligaments against Western Carolina. Both of those guys are having their knees heavily taped, but they're in bowl prep. And also Amari Cooper wearing a knee brace on his left knee. But all four guys have been in practice. But all players have been in practice for the past 2 weeks. They've been in bowl prep. So Saban is very much so managing the time and managing the minutes that these guys are in practice, but they're getting them all healthy and in the rotation at the right time. The play caller of Lane Kiffin in this matchup, expect a lot of the same. Expect a lot of the bubble screens, the dink and dunks, the halfback screens, the wide receiver screens. I expect a lot more of the jet sweeps in this upcoming game against Ohio State. Expect more of the run game to be established, especially with Derrick Henry. You can see a lot of T.J. Yeldon. Yeldon can still Yeldon can still become Alabama's all-time leading rusher where touchdowns is concerned if he's able to capture 6 touchdowns in 2 games. That's going to be difficult to do. But if Yeldon is able to accomplish that, that would put Yeldon at 43, I want to say, rushing touchdowns for his career, which would put him over Sean Alexander and Mark Ingram for first all-time in Alabama history. 6 touchdowns in two games, not insurmountable, but it will be difficult with him sharing that backfield with the likes of Derrick Henry, Tyron Jones, and some of the other players that have started to come on strong as of late. But the main thing Alabama's been focusing on, believe it or not, Mark, is on the defensive side of the football. A defensive coordinator, Kirby Smart, trying to get the defensive line to not only generate the pass rush on third-string quarterback Cardale Jones, but also find ways to contain him in the pocket. They don't have a lot of film on Jones, but the one thing that I've researched is Cardale Jones, coming out of Greenville High School in Ohio, this young man he rushed for 14 touchdowns. Cardale Jones rushed for 14 touchdowns in high school. He passed for over 4,000 yards with 40 touchdowns. So the man can sling the pigskin, and the man can also run the football. So it's going to be an interesting decision on, does Kirby Smart dial up the blitz packages, or does he choose to just contain the outside and bottle up Cardale Jones in the pocket as much as he possibly can? It's going to be a very interesting matchup, but the main things that I've seen in practice this week is being able to see how much can they contain Ohio State's offense from a defensive perspective, and just offensively getting all the key players back healthy, and just the playmaking ability of Cam Sims and how much he may be able to play in this matchup.
If Cardale Jones can throw the ball through a brick wall, he has a cannon of an arm. Don't know that necessarily means a whole lot in this game, although the Buckeyes will try to run Devin Smith on several go routes because that's his specialty. He's a burner. He can get to the end zone. So they'll air it out a few times, no doubt, against this Alabama secondary and try to hit a couple times for the big play. That's great research on Cardale Jones, Stephen M., because, this is a kid that very much impressed everybody against Wisconsin in the championship game, but I think Buckeye fans should calm down just a little bit in their exuberance over the kid's play, because while he stepped into a difficult situation as a third-string kid who had never played meaningful snaps in the big time and stepped up against a really good defense in the championship game, he was never under duress. He never faced adversity in that game. They scored right out of the gate. He played from ahead the entire game, never was put in the position of having to play with a deficit, having to play in a difficult situation. So we'll see how he responds against Alabama, because there's no doubt that there's going to be some level of adversity in that game against the Tide. He didn't make mistakes. He didn't deliver the ball. He didn't force it. He didn't do anything like that. But again, I don't know that he was put in that type of situation where he was put in a situation again where he would force the football and feel that he had to make a play down 10 on 3rd and 11, for example, in the third quarter against Alabama, which that could be a situation we see. T.J. Yeldon, yeah, I'm glad that you note that about his career accomplishments, because I didn't realize that he was that close to being the all-time touchdown leader at Alabama. That's something that you just have to kind of sit and let sink in. Possibly the most storied program in college football, and T.J. Yeldon is that close to the pinnacle we saw Sean Alexander and what he did not only in college but going to the NFL and being just a complete wrecking crew for about 5 seasons with the Seahawks. And you mentioned the Heisman Trophy winner, Mark Ingram. So T.J. Yeldon, I don't know if he's gotten his due, but you set records when you're as consistent as he is and when you start and break out as a freshman despite sharing playing time as he did in 2012 with Eddie Lacy at that point. So whether he gets it or not, I think that speaks volumes of T.J. Yeldon's contributions, playing nicked up many times and being the guy that Nick Saban goes to when they really need tough yardage in a big drive on the ground in some of the bigger ball games we've seen down through the years. Nick Saban approached this game and was officially introduced to the media, of course, once the playoff was announced in a news conference, and then also when they got all 4 coaches together and had a discussion. I don't know that he's met with the media officially that much beyond that. Anything that he said that you've picked up, Stephen M., that gives us any real insight to how he feels about his team, how he is planning for Ohio State, and how he views the Buckeyes?
Saban is very confident in this year's team. He raves about this year's team, and it kind of started in the Arkansas game earlier in the season where Alabama had come off a huge game against Florida in which Blake Sims had a career game, Amari Cooper had a career game. The defense played pretty well for the most part, Alabama winning that matchup 42-21. And then against Arkansas, you kind of saw the Crimson Tide struggling to find itself. Blake Sims had a couple of errant passes, did not throw an interception, but placed a couple of balls in bad spots. Alabama couldn't run the football in a wet and muggy environment at Fayetteville against the Razorbacks, and they ended up coming away with a 14-13 victory with some huge plays on the defensive side of the ball, plays made by Trey DePreez, Jonathan Allen, and of course the final play, an interception for Landon Collins, in which you saw something that you have never really seen out of an Alabama team. And I've covered this team, I think it should perk up. Like, everybody after that interception just goes onto the field. They're jumping all over Landon Collins. You have the coaching staff jumping all over Landon Collins, fist pumping on the sideline. You've never seen that. And I think after that game, Saban recognized he's going to let this team play with some personality. This is not the teams he's had in the past, but the personality and the togetherness of this year's team. I think the Arkansas game was when it kind of clicked off in Saban that this is a different team. It plays with a different style. It plays with a different personality, and I gotta let the personalities play out. And when Saban got the gist of that and let that happen, then he himself started to see how special this team could be. So I think he has a high respect. He's had a lot of fun with this year's team, with this program. With the college football playoff as a whole, Saban has a healthy respect for all coaches and all teams that are competing, especially against Ohio State and Urban Meyer in particular. Saban 2-1 against Urban Meyer overall. Of course, the 2009 SEC championship victory and the 2010 regular season victory over Florida when Urban Meyer was the coach there. But the one thing that Saban respects about Meyer is Meyer, he's a defensive mind like Saban, but Meyer can run some offense. Urban Meyer can very well run some offense, and with the coaching staff that Ohio State has in Columbus, it's not just Urban Meyer, but Tom Herman, who won the 2014 Broyles Award, reminds me a lot of Lane Kiffin in both of their aspects to get premier players, to get the skilled players on the edge, get them to make plays on the perimeter, really mix up the offense, really mix up the scheme, and try to confuse opposing defenses. And that's what Tom Herman of Ohio State and Lane Kiffin of Alabama both do exceptionally well. With Alabama, we know it's Amari Cooper getting him to the edge, DeAndre White. In the run game with T.J. Yeldon and Derrick Henry. With Ohio State, we know it's Ezekiel Elliott, Devin Smith, Michael Thomas. getting these guys in space and letting these playmakers go to work. And Nick Saban has a healthy, high respect for Urban Meyer. He has a high respect for Jimbo Fisher at Florida State because he helped he helped bring in Jimbo Fisher into the fold. And, of course, Mike Helfrich of Oregon. We all know that the Oregon Ducks are a very high potent program. They've been one ever since Chip Kelly took the reins there. And when Chip Kelly and their team left, Mark Helfrich with a very good and capable football team. Saban, very healthy respect for the programs that he's going to face in the college football playoff, but more so Urban Meyer because he's faced Meyer before or at Florida. He knows what to expect from Urban Meyer, and Alabama knows what to expect from a coached Urban Meyer team in Ohio State. It's going to be a hard-fought game. It's going to be a battle in the trenches, and it's going to be which team is willing to show up more in the Sugar Bowl.
There was a coaches poll taken sometime last week, just a few days ago. I don't recall in the past coaches on the FBS level being asked to predict a winner of the BCS championship game, but they did it with this college football playoff. I don't know how many coaches participated in the poll, but they polled both the Power 5 and the Group of 5 conference coaches, and Alabama won overwhelmingly over Ohio State, like 90 or 91% of the vote there. And then also in projecting a game against Florida State or Oregon, Alabama is expected by like 70% of the coaches out there to win the national championship. So it's very much a David and Goliath, despite Ohio State's talent, despite the name brand, the history, and the prestige of Ohio State as being one of the pillars of college football. These two teams are kind of measured as a bit of a, not a mismatch, because the point spread isn't out of hand. It's like 9 points right now, but people are pretty confident that Alabama is going to win this football game. I think that rests on a few things. Alabama's been in more big games in recent years than Ohio State, having the probation year in 2012 and then losing the Big Ten championship game last year. The presence of a third-string quarterback, if J.T. Barrett was in there, I'm sure the point spread would be much closer, despite the performance of Cardell Jones against Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. And then I also just think that Ohio State's possibly a year away from being as really good as I expect them to be in 2015 and 16 because of a presence of a ton of freshmen and sophomore that they rely on both sides of the ball. And there's really nothing that you can point to with this Alabama team and say, attack that. I think people most likely, if they're pushed to look at something that where there's an Alabama weakness, it would be in that secondary because Nick Marshall carved them up, and they've been carved up a few times this season, Clint Trickett to a certain extent, and last season. But there are a few defenses, if any, across college football this season that haven't had their letdowns against really precision offenses. So I'm not concerned about the Alabama defense. Is there any concern, and I'm going to separate the Alabama coaching staff and the players because I'm sure that they highly respect Ohio State, and I don't think there's much of a talent difference. I just think, again, it's game experience and that this Alabama group is just that in sync right now and has the game that polished and refined versus Ohio State, a little bit more of a loose cannon, a little bit rougher around the edges in terms of really getting their game together under a third-string quarterback. But in the Alabama community, the people that you talk to, Stephen M., is there any concern about this game?
Well, of course, there's always concern about a big-time game, especially a game where it's the college football playoff, first inaugural college football playoff, and you're playing for it's do-or-die time. Alabama fans remember the Sugar Bowl last year against Oklahoma in the 2014 Sugar Bowl where a lot of people felt like Alabama should have won that game. They entered that game with arguably the winningest quarterback in program history with A.J. McCarron. They entered that game with C.J. Mosley, Clinton Dix. Of course, Landon Collins was on that team. Amari Cooper and DeAndre White both were finally 100% healthy. You had T.J. Yeldon and Derrick Henry who made his name in that game, the 2014 Sugar Bowl, and that was one where Alabama fans believed they had from the get-go. You can throw in a scenario that Alabama felt like they shouldn't have been there. They felt like they should have played for a national championship. Of course, after the debacle against Auburn, the famous kick six returned by Chris Davis, 109 yards, and a 34 for 28. Are you kidding me, game? But against Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl, the upset happened. 45 to 31. Eric Stryker played well on the defensive side of the ball for Oklahoma. Josh Heupel drawn up a perfect game plan for Trevor Knight. He carved Alabama's secondary for 4 touchdowns. So the Alabama community, they want redemption. They want revenge in the Sugar Bowl. They want revenge in New Orleans. And that's what this team is playing for, to better its record in the Sugar Bowl. And I think this year's team fully understands it's a business-minded aspect. Go down there in the Sugar Bowl, execute on both sides of the ball, and make plays happen. And you mentioned Alabama's secondary. I feel like this secondary has made tremendous strides this season. Coming into the season, it was coined as Alabama's weakness defensively as a whole. But it all starts with Landon Collins. Landon Collins has stepped in and has become the true anchor, the true leader of this defense, a defense that lost C.J. Mosley, HaHa Clinton-Diggs, Vinny Sunseri, Jeffrey Pagan, Adrian Hubbard, Ed Stinson. So much talent lost to the 2014 NFL Draft, and people wondered who was going to be the alpha dog, who was going to be the anchor. People pointed to Trader Priest. People pointed to A'Shawn Robinson and Jonathan Allen, and those players have played well, don't get me wrong. But Landon Collins has really taken on the role of leader on that defense. He's got 91 tackles, 3 interceptions, 6 pass breakups. He's been a special teams terror all year, and he's been that since he stepped onto the team in 2012 as a freshman. And not only is it his playmaking ability against the pass game, Landon Collins has stepped in and run support and has made some key tackles there, but he's also taken Cyrus Jones and Geno Smith both under his wing and taught both of them. Cyrus Jones, in his first true year of playing cornerback in 2013, his first assignment was 6'6" Mike Evans. Welcome to the league, Cyrus Jones. Welcome to the nation. You got to play 6'6" Mike Evans of Texas A&M, and yes, he got burned. But he learned from it, and he came back this season. Cyrus Jones, I think he's 5th on the team in stops with 51 tackles. He has 2 interceptions, and young man leads the team with 9 pass breakups. Cyrus Jones can ball. He came back, had a huge season. The young man, he's only 5'10", but he plays with so much physicality. They picked with him this year, and he's came up huge in a lot of those games, especially against Mississippi State. He played well. He played well against Auburn. He played well against Tennessee. He handled Malachi Dupree in the LSU matchup. So Cyrus Jones has really came on, has really learned a lot, and has matured as Alabama's best coverage cornerback. And when you look at Geno Smith, another player out of Louisiana who has really modeled his game after Landon Collins coming down the stretch of this season. Geno Smith had a huge freshman season, took a back seat his sophomore year, but has learned from Landon Collins in the aspect of not just playing the ball, but playing up and run support. And in this season, I've seen Geno Smith make some pops in the run game, and I'm going, my God, where has this man been all season last year? He's made some big-time plays in the run game as well as the pass game. And Landon Collins' play has even sparked 5th-year senior Nick Perry. Nick Perry's had some big moments in his career, but he's also had his struggles. But this season, Nick Perry, 3rd on the team with 74 tackles. He's got 2 interceptions. He's made some big-time plays in the run game, in the pass game, his on-ball skills. He's come up huge, and it's just the play of Landon Collins has sparked the entire team. He's really took on that leadership role. And like you said, I mean, all teams are going to have their rough moments, but this Alabama secondary, it's gone from being coined the weak link to actually saving this team in a few games this season.
Well, as I often do, I take portions of the SEC in 60, and I'll take that by subject matter, and I'll repurpose it and put it together for a podcast. So I just listened to that spiel about the Alabama secondary, and I cannot imagine anywhere in media out there being a better rundown of a unit, specifically this time the Alabama secondary, than what we heard right there. So that will be available on podcast, the Ohio State-Alabama preview with Mr. Stephen M. Smith, and we'll get that out there very soon. But specifically, I loved the personal breakdown. And for anybody out there that listens to me on a regular basis, I bring on guys from all over the country that know their teams back and forth, and that's what I love to hear because I get the personal breakdown that time of the Crimson Tide secondary. So I love it, Stephen M. Good stuff right there. So we hope to have you on one more time, maybe with the SEC in 60 next week, when we can really grind it down with a few days left to the Sugar Bowl, the big showdown. This is like college football royalty, Alabama, Ohio State, and, of course, more importantly this time, it's that first semifinal opportunity for those four teams to make it into the inaugural national championship game under this format. So, Stephen M., if I don't hear from you, of course, I'll be checking you out on Twitter and following your tweets there and all of your work on your many platforms. But I want you to have a Merry Christmas. Enjoy the holidays.
Thank you. You do the same, Mark. I'm trying to not eat as much as I did for Thanksgiving, but it'll only be an attempt.
I keep telling myself that, but, I just let it go the last few days, and eggnogs, cookies, whatever's in front of me, I'm going to go all in, and then, of course, January 2nd, I go back to work and really try to shape up for 2015. But we'll let that be for now. So Stephen M. Smith, touchdownalabama.net. Let us know real quick before we let you go, Stephen M., what you're working on and where else we can find you.
Well, as of right now, I'm working on this top 10 most improved players piece, breaking down the top 10 most improved Alabama players this season. That piece will be up, if not today, then most definitely before the end of this week. And viewers can always find me on Twitter at ESPN_future. Also, Touchdown Alabama at TD Alabama on Twitter. Just breaking down the top 10 Crimson Tide players this season, and also giving a little, having some fun with putting down some of the best moments that took place this season, because there were some very critical moments in this season that really helped Alabama propel its status to being an SEC champion this season and the #1 overall seed in the college football playoff. So just the top 10 players that have improved this season, and also touching back on some of the key moments that took place in 2014 in Alabama football.
I'm guessing that some of those key moments might involve Mr. Number 9, Amari Cooper. So unbelievably, we've talked Ohio State, Alabama for the last 15 or 20 or 25 minutes and not talked about him. He's a given. So we don't need to talk about Amari Cooper, and I'm sure we will talk about Alabama's probably the best wide receiver in college football against that Ohio State secondary next week. So again, Stephen M., appreciate the time, the information, and the insight. You have yourself a Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Mark. Same to you.
All right, this is the SEC in 60, and above all else, before we sign off, I'd like to thank Peter Flournoy, Dr. SEC, for inviting us to take part in this show and relaunch it on his radio network, the SEC Fans Radio Network, SECradio.com. Look it up there and look up a variety of SEC-based show, either team-based shows or conference-based shows, including, of course, the SEC in 60. We're here every Monday at noon on Google Hangouts. You can catch us throughout the week on YouTube at my Mark Rogers TV channel, MarkRogersTV.com as well, and we release it on podcast if you don't want to see our lovely faces. So this is the SEC in 60. It's 60 minutes of college football focusing on the SEC. You have yourself a Merry Christmas. We appreciate you giving us your time, and we always love to hear the comments. So keep them coming in. After the first of the year, I hope to launch a new segment where I'm responding to viewer comments, both kind and unkind. That should be a whole lot of fun as well. So again, Merry Christmas. And until next time, May God bless you. This is the SEC in 60.